International, www.netivyah.org.
Shalom. My name is Joseph Shulam, and together with Brad TV, we are doing every week the portion of the Torah that is read in all the synagogues around the world. This Shabbat, all the synagogues will be reading from Leviticus chapter 1. We are starting a new book. We're starting Leviticus. And the portion starts in Leviticus 1:1 and ends in Leviticus 6, verse 7. Now, the book of Leviticus is a very, very important and interesting book, but it is not very useful to most Christians. Very few sermons are taught from the book of Leviticus, and scholars in Christian universities and colleges spend maybe an hour on the whole book of Leviticus in a survey of the Old Testament, usually. But the book of Leviticus is probably one of the most important books in the law of Moses, of the 5 books of Moses, because it's called Torat Kohanim. It means the law of the priesthood. Mainly instructions for the priests, for the cultus, for the worship in the tabernacle. But one of the interesting verses is the very first verse. In Greek, in English, in all the languages, it's called Leviticus because it deals with the Levitical priesthood. In Hebrew, the name of the book is the first word of the book, like in Exodus, it's Shmot, and in Genesis, it's Genesis, and in the first words of the book usually also gives it the name because there was no names in the ancient scrolls. So, in Hebrew, it's called Vayikra, which if it's translated to English, and it is, and the Lord summoned, called Moses. Now that within itself is a very interesting thing. Why? Because it is a direct continuation of the end of the book of Exodus. The books were divided essentially by the fact that the scrolls were made out of skin, out of leather, usually goat skin, and they were heavy. And if you have a whole scroll of the whole Torah, even today in our synagogue in Jerusalem, it would weigh about 15 kilo. 15 kilo is in pounds, would be 45 pounds. So it's not easy to carry it. And of course, they didn't have printing presses, and they didn't print miniature Bibles. Or today we have a whole library on our phones and on our iPads and on our computers. My phone, for example, has more than one library of biblical material and church fathers and church history and geography and maps and atlases. It wasn't like that in the ancient days. They had to consider the size of the scroll to make it practical to use it. So Leviticus is a direct continuation of what happened at the end of the book of Exodus. I'm going to read from chapter 40, verse 38 of the book of Exodus, the last chapter of the book of Exodus, verse 38. And it says, "And the cloud of the Lord of the tabernacle over the tabernacle was by day with fire, and by night in front of all of Israel in a cloud. And the cloud lifted up, and Moses called by God into the tent of meeting, and God starts talking to him. What does it mean Moses was called by God, summoned by God? This is what it means. Moses did not enter the tabernacle, even though he was a Levite, but he was not a priest. And Aaron was a priest, the chief priest, and the sons of Aaron were priests. They could enter into the tabernacle at will, but Moses was not. And that's why the book of Leviticus starts, God summoned Moses, called Moses, come in, talk to me. And he gives him instructions. Talk to the children of Israel and tell them, if a person, a human, wants to offer a sacrifice to the Lord, he will offer it from the cow or from the sheep or from the goat, and from these you will make your sacrifices. Now this to us is a curious text. Why? Because God is initiating the service in the tabernacle, and they just finished building the tabernacle. The last portion of the book of Exodus is an accounting, a report of all the work and all the workers and all the furniture and all the instruments and the structure of the tabernacle. Kind of a bookkeeper's report. The end of the book of Exodus. And now the tabernacle is finished, the cloud is above it by day, and the pillar of fire by night, and they're beginning to continue their journey after the time that they spent around Mount Sinai, approximately around 2 years from the time that they arrived at Mount Sinai, and then they got purified, and then they received the law, and then they had the golden calf, and then they had the golden calf before receiving the law, and then they received the law, and then they were commanded to build a tabernacle, and that took them time. So now they're ready to move on, but God is giving them instructions of how to worship, what kind of animals to use for the sacrifices. Now, sacrificing to God is a human phenomenon. There is no ancient religion in Asia, in the Middle East, in North America, Central America, South America, Africa, the Aborigines in Australia, the Maoris in New Zealand, all the ancient peoples understood internally, innately, that a relationship with God, or even with gods, requires sacrifice. Some of them, like our neighbors on the other side of the Jordan that worship the Molech, sacrifice their own children to the Molech. The Indians in what's today's Mexico sacrifice their young maidens to their gods. People sacrificed animals. People sacrificed gold, silver, precious materials. Sacrifice is a natural response to divinity. Even if you believe in many idols, like the river god in Egypt, the god of the Nile, they sacrificed to him. Why? Because the desire of the human being that is dealing with something that is out of his control, the gods were out of the control of the human being, is to appease those gods, to please them, to give them gifts. That way, the idea was that those gods are not going to show their anger on the people. You sacrifice to the Nile god, hoping that the Nile will act normally and in the right time will have the rising of the Nile, and in the right time it will not flood the fields and destroy the agriculture and cause havoc to human beings and to their economy. If you lived in northern Israel or in Israel altogether, one of the chief gods was the god Baal, that we hear Amos, Hosea, all the prophets speak against Baal and the worship of Baal. Something very interesting that is very, very new, recent. They built a train, a fast train to go from Jerusalem to the airport in Lydda, biblical Lydda, and from Lydda on to Tel Aviv, and from Tel Aviv north all the way to Nahariya, to the Lebanese border. In order to span a valley, very interesting valley, just in front of my house actually, they built a bridge, a huge bridge, for that train to go on. Well, when they were building the bridge, and that happens very, very often in the land of Israel, they had to dig. When they dug, they found archaeology. Archaeology dated to the days of the kings of Judea, Hezekiah, Achaz, actually from the days of Achaz, even before Hezekiah. They found a temple, an Israelite temple. Not a Canaanite temple, an Israelite temple that had all the trappings of an Israelite temple. We are talking a temple that was outside of Jerusalem, let's say 8 miles from Jerusalem, and 8 miles from the temple that Solomon built. So there was an alternative temple. And in that temple, they had eclectic gods worshipped. In that temple, beside the God of Israel, beside Jehovah, the God of Israel, they found statues of Baal, statues of Asherah, of all the Canaanite gods that were worshipped by our neighbors and were forbidden by God in the Torah. But they also found altars. And they found the Holy of Holies, and they found the Holy, and they found a structure very similar to the one that Solomon built in the hill of the thresh fields of Arunah that David bought from them, from the Hittite Arunah. Syncretism still exists. It exists in Judaism, it exists in Christianity, it exists in most religious groups, because the environment and the surrounding and the culture of your neighbors and your co-neighbors that live within your camp influences you. And so it's very interesting that they found a temple, an Israelite temple, with pagan idols in it. By the way, when they dug in the old city, in the Jewish quarter, and they dug the house, what is called the house of the high priest, or the house of one of the princes of the Hashmonite kingdom of Judea, they found in the house of the high priest household gods, idols. So, yes, the book of Leviticus came to arrange and control and instruct of how to worship God in the tabernacle or later in the temple. But it has a lot of very important principles. And the first thing that we learn from it is you're not going to sacrifice human beings. You can sacrifice from the beef, from the sheep, from the goats, from the birds, doves, You know that when Mary and Joseph came to dedicate baby Jesus in the temple in Jerusalem in Luke chapter 2, they didn't bring a sheep or a goat or a bull or a cow. They brought 2 turtle doves. What does that tell us about God's relationship to worship and to sacrifice? We're going to see it in chapter 5 in our section. God looks at us differentially. He looks at us in our worship, not in absolute terms, but in relative terms. And in our portion in chapter 5 of Leviticus, still within the reading of Shabbat, next Shabbat, we find out that if you're rich and you sin, you have to bring a bull. Bull, heavy, expensive, a lot of meat. If you're not so rich, you can build a goat or a sheep. For the same sin, you can bring a goat or a sheep. If you are not middle class, lower social economic class, you can bring 2 turtle doves. But if you're poor of the poor, all you have to bring is a handful of meal, of wheat flour, anointed with oil, and that will atone for you as much as the bull will atone for the rich person. I love this, folks, because, religion, that's true for modern Judaism and it's true for modern Christianity, wants to look at everything in absolute terms. But God doesn't. God doesn't look in absolute terms. He looks at us relatively. And we have the story in the Gospel of Luke of 2 people that go to the temple and want to contribute. A Pharisee comes and contributes 1,000 denarii, which is a lot of money. It's 1,000 days' wages. 3 years' wages he contributes in the temple. He's rich. No problem. An old widow comes and contributes 2 pennies, 2 prutot, 2 widow's mites. We call them those prutot today. We buy them from the stores that sell archaeological things, real things. You buy them today, each pruta is about $80. Real thing, the real coin that the widow gave. Each one today is $80, in good shape, museum quality shape, coin, authentic, with a certificate. But this widow gave 2 prutot, 2 pennies. And Yeshua asks, who gave more? The answer is, the widow gave more because that's all she had. That's all she had. She gave everything she had. The rich Pharisee gave from his surplus. Relative appreciation of each individual by the Lord God, creator of the universe. It's something that is important for us to know. Religion tends to see everything in black and white, but not the New Testament, not Yeshua. And we as his disciples today in the 21st century also ought to look at our brothers and our sisters in the same differential way, relatively, because we can't require the same thing from the poor in our congregations as we, or the Holy Spirit, should require from the rich. We don't require anything in our congregation. We leave it up to the people themselves, individuals, to decide. We very seldom talk about money. We only once a year we talk about money. When we read the portion of Truma, of contribution, in the book of Exodus, when they're taking the contribution for the tabernacle, That's the only time that we talk about collection. We never mention it. We don't pass a plate. We don't have a box. Why don't we do it? We don't do it because of the teaching of Yeshua. Yeshua said, when you give money in the temple or in the synagogue, give it in secret. Don't blow the trumpet and say, I'm coming now to give a contribution. Yeah, I gave so much to the Lord, I gave so much to the church, I gave so much to the synagogue. No. We need to take the words of Yeshua seriously. To believe in Yeshua is good and important, but it's more important to believe Yeshua, what he instructed us to do, how he instructed us to live. It's more important to believe in him. Yeah, to believe in him and then to ignore what he teaches, to ignore his commandments is no good. We read the first letter of John. We have the Gospel of John, we have 3 letters from John. The first letter of John, he says, if you don't keep his commandments, no good. No good. Yes. And Yeshua said, go into all the world to make disciples, teaching them to observe all things which I have commanded you. So evangelists and missionaries that go around and teach people about Yeshua, very seldom, if ever, I've heard the foreign missionary in Israel teach people that they have to keep the commandments of Yeshua, of Jesus, the commandments of the apostles. We have plenty of commandments. And the truth is that we must believe in Yeshua, in Jesus, and we must believe Jesus. Whatever he told us, whatever he taught us, whatever he commanded us to do. So, all over the world, human beings that have gods, have deities, sacrifice. Sometimes sacrifice human beings, sometimes sacrifice their own sons and daughters. Maimonides, one of the great rabbis that lived in the 12th century in Spain, most of his life in Spain, Moses Maimonides, asked this question in a book called The Guide to the Perplexed. Why did God command us to do these sacrifices? With intricate instructions in the book of Leviticus, we're going to still see it, of how to do the birds, to pluck their feathers, to clean them, to open them, what to do with the liver, what to do with the kidneys, what to do with this laborious commands of how to do the sacrifices in the tabernacle. But my mother asked, why? Why did God need that? Because we have text, both in the New Testament and in the Old Testament, that says God doesn't need these sacrifices. We're not doing it for God. God doesn't eat roasted meat on the grill, on the altar. So why Isaiah chapter 1 says these things? The most crucial one is Jeremiah chapter 7, verse 21 to 23, that God says, I didn't command you forefathers when I took them out of Egypt to sacrifice. I don't need those sacrifices. I don't want those sacrifices. What I really want you is to listen to me, to have a relationship, to hear what I say, to take me seriously. That's what I really want, God says in Jeremiah chapter 7. Same thing in Hosea chapter 6, verse 6 says, I require mercy more than sacrifice. Yep. God is not an idol. So why did God command the whole 13 chapters of the book of Leviticus? Almost half the book of Leviticus is dealing with sacrifices. The Levitical code is here. That's why it's called Leviticus in Greek. So why did he command us to sacrifice? Maimonides says, because he knew our nature. And we're going to see what our neighbors do, and we want to do the same as they do, because the environment decides the consciousness. The environment is a very powerful thing, and it decides the consciousness. And that's why bad friends corrupt our children, and good friends encourage our children. That's why the environment that we live in can sometimes, not 100% true, but I would say most of the times, influence our families. So for this, my mother says, God gave them a pure, controlled, dictated by divine will form of worship, similar to the neighbors. Even our temple that Solomon designed with Lebanese workers, 50,000 workers in Jerusalem, Lebanese workers, a lot of people that came from Lebanon and built the temple of Solomon and all of its furniture and everything. The architects were very similar to the architects of in Tyre, in Lebanon. The architecture of the temple at Jerusalem is not unique to the Hebrew nation, and it's not unique to the Hebrew God. God gave us something similar, not exactly, but very similar, so that we don't go around and do what those people that built under the train tracks, under the bridge of the train in the valley of the Oaks, the Valley of the Cedar. That's the name of the valley that in front of my house, where that archaeological dig is still going on, with that Israelite temple with pagan idols in it as well. Yes, so that we don't copy what the pagans do. God gave us an orderly, systematic, godly code of the tabernacle, of the temple, and the priesthood, and what they have to do and what they shouldn't do. This is very, very important for us to understand, dear brothers and sisters. And I'm not going to get into the details of how to sacrifice, how to slaughter the cow, the beef, how to slaughter the turtle doves, how to put the wood on the altar. All these details I'm not going to get into because they're not relevant for us. But what is relevant for us, and with this I summarize, is that yes, we by nature ought to want to sacrifice for God. We ought to want to share our moments of joy and our moments of sorrow, our moments of riches and our moments of lack. We want to share them with God, because it pleases God. The joy of the Lord is your strength. We read in the letter of Esther. The joy of the Lord is your strength. Yes, it's true. When we sorrow, when we are sad about our own actions and about our own sins and about the sins of our countries and the sins of our communities, it makes God happy, because it makes him see how much we care about what is good, what is true, and what is right, and what is pure, and what is beneficial to ourselves and to the next generations, in his name, in the name of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So yes, read the book of Leviticus. Read from chapter 1 to chapter 6 and follow these ideas that I shared with you. God bless all of you and strengthen you. In Yeshua's name, Amen.
Netivyah International, www.netivyahinternational.org.